Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today. My name is Lucas Martekian, and on behalf of the Humanities Institute, I would like to welcome you to the New York Botanical Garden. The garden is located on the ancestral homeland of the Lenape Delaware people, and we honor them and acknowledge their displacement, dispossession, and continued presence. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce the first food dialogue of 2024, featuring award-winning author Esmeralda Santiago, whose books have inspired many generations of readers. The food dialogues started in spring 2021 as a partnership between the Humanities Institute and Dr. Jessica B. Harris, with generous support from the Mellon Foundation. They're a series of conversations with prominent chefs, authors, and food historians, examining how notions of heritage and identity are shaped through food. In 2021, we started exploring the theme Reclaiming Cultural Heritage. In 2022, we celebrated the contributions of African American farmers to the history and culture of the United States. And in 2023, last year, we explored literary representations of plants and gardens. Building on last year's dialogues, in 2024, we will continue to explore personal and literary narratives around plants, people, and belonging under the theme The Healing of Gardens. That is, how gardens and the plants in them can be instruments of healing, and how, in turn, gardens themselves are in need of healing. Throughout the year, we will be featuring prominent authors, including, of course, Esmeralda Santiago today, and Camille T. Dungy on June 15th as part of the Garden's Juneteenth celebrations. Dr. Harris has really guided this series of talks from the beginning, as well as curated NYBG's African American Garden. The African American Garden, located at the Edible Academy, is an exploration of the legacies and experiences of African Americans in the US and elsewhere through the lens of plants. Since its creation in 2022, it has received more than 100,000 visitors, and this year it will reopen on June 15th under the title Diaspora, Same Boat, Different Stops. So please mark your calendars. Dr. Harris is America's leading scholar on the food and foodways of the African American diaspora, and she serves on NYBG's Board of Trustees. She has received numerous awards, including the James Byrd Lifetime Achievement Award in 2020, and she has been listed as one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. The Netflix show High on the Hog, inspired by her 12th book of the same title, won a Peabody and an NAACP Image Award, and was nominated by the James Byrd Foundation for Best Documentary. Last year, Netflix released the second season of the show, which features NYBG's African American Garden. It's episode 4, minute 19, if you're wondering. Know that we are obsessed with it. So without further ado, I'm pleased to turn the microphone over to Dr. Harris, who will introduce our wonderful guest, Esmeralda Santiago, today, for what I'm sure will be a meaningful and transformative conversation. Thank you again for coming.
Oh, goodness. Good morning. I'm glad I can't see out there because it always makes me nervous. Esmeralda Santiago is pretty amazing. I'm just going to read this. I contend that often the best conversations are those in the green room before we get started, as we're getting to know each other. But hopefully we will just continue, and we're going to do a few sort of rewinds on that conversation as we speak. This is the official bio. Born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Esmeralda Santiago is the author of 3 groundbreaking memoirs. When I Was Puerto Rican, Almost a Woman, which was adapted into a Peabody Award-winning movie for PBS's Masterpiece Theater, and some of you may have seen it, and The Turkish Lover. She's also the author of 3 novels and 1 children's book. Upon publication of When I Was Puerto Rican, she was hailed at a disturbingly young age as, and I quote, a welcome new voice full of passion and authority in the Washington Post. That's no mean feat. A graduate of Harvard University and Sarah Lawrence College, where she got an MFA, Ms. Santiago has been awarded 5 honorary doctorates. I'm jealous. She has also served on the boards of the Jacob Burns Film Center, the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, the Pan American Center, and the National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture. Please welcome to the stage Esmeralda Santiago. I was talking about how the best conversations sometimes happen in the green room. I'd been saving this one up and sort of, you know how you roll things around in your mouth and it's just like, ooh, this is gonna be good, this is gonna be good. So I happen to have known that Esmeralda Santiago went to the High School of Performing Arts. Alum? Alum? Yay! Drama, music, or dance? Oh, drama. Because what we both figured out was I knew that she had gone as well. And so in the green room, I said, I think I've got a surprise. I don't remember exactly how I phrased it, and then told her that I had gone to P as well. And in fact, our time at Performing Arts had overlapped. So it was just amazing. We didn't know each other there. We have met just maybe under an hour ago at this point. And so that was fun. And then conversation, as you can well imagine, ensued. And she responded by telling me about Langston Hughes.
I said, the most important event in my teenage years happened at Performing Arts High School when Langston Hughes was invited to speak to an assembly of the students. And Jessica Harris, was that your last name at the time, by the way?
Oh, yeah. I've only had one of those.
She introduced him. We had no idea. This is like, talk about random things happening.
Yeah.
But that event in my life, I had been in the United States maybe a couple of years. I hardly spoke any English. I had never found any literature by any brown people. And so there he was, looking very dapper in his light-colored suit, very kind and gentle, and spoke very, very well. And I remember going home to Brooklyn. I lived in Bed-Stuy at the time, running to the library and picking up every book by him that I could find, including his translation of Sor Juana's poems, I believe. Another person I had never heard of, and completely spent the next few days reading everything and feeling like, oh my God, there are people like us who feel the same way. I mean, it really was one of those seminal moments in my life where I felt there are possibilities beyond the environment was telling me was possible. And you were there. It was just amazing.
Was there. We discovered that one of the things that happened at PA back in those days was a senior was called to, to officiate. You got to say, I pledge allegiance, the whole 9 yards. Remember, I'm old, she's not. We're the same age. Yeah. But the point is that, so a senior was involved in leading the assembly. When she said that, I hadn't thought about it in eons, the proverbial donkey's years. I was that senior for that assembly. So we had connected without connecting, and it was just...
I was just, it was like, golpe del corazón, I really felt it in my heart, like, oh my goodness, because I talk about this particular event in my life when I go to high schools and how important it is for artists to visit young people when they're still alive, when we can actually see them. And so that was just such an amazing moment. And now I can add to that story, which is really great.
Always fun, always fun. So just to recap a little bit briefly, because we've got one alum in the audience, tell us about your class and some of your friends and surroundings at PA before we go on to talk about gardens. We will go to gardens and food, I promise.
So on the same, my whole, the cohort that I was with, Glenn Thurman was one of the students, Ben Vereen, and Priscilla Lopez. And so they were within, I think Glenn and, Glenn was, I think, in my class. Priscilla Lopez was a class before me. Itzhak Perlman in the music department was also there briefly, and then he became internationally famous when he was a teenager and kind of left us. But so these were the people that I stayed in touch with for several years after I graduated, and still hear about from other friends that were part of that cohort, because it was a very small. The school is very, very small,
Right.
and so we all kind of knew each other, even though we were scattered all over the 5 boroughs.
Exactly. And for those of you who are not familiar with the High School of Performing Arts, it exists still. It has now been folded with the High School of Music and Arts into Fiorello LaGuardia. So it's Fiorello LaGuardia High School. It still exists. Those of you with artistic children who are looking for a place to call home, find home, make home, entrance is by audition. Encourage them. We need all the artists we can get. Okay, so encourage them. It's a public high school. Okay, so paid public service announcement now ended. Onward to gardens. In our garden at the Barnsley Beds, and I encourage all of you to go see it. It's still getting planted for its 3rd iteration right now. The 3rd iteration is going to be called the African American Garden, Diaspora. Subtitle, Same Boat, Different Stops. So this is our 3rd year, and we are connecting the dots. However, last year in the African American Garden, the Caribbean experience, we started with sugarcane field and tried to create a series of gardens that would pay homage to the Caribbean experience. How would you define a Caribbean garden? And what plants would be your must-have plants?
Well, sugarcane is a very big part of my life and thinking and history, because my paternal ancestors were all from the African diaspora and ended up in the sugar fields of Puerto Rico. And so when I was growing up, I was born in San Juan, but at a very early age, we moved to Toa Baja, which was a rural area. And this is what was behind our house, was just a wall of sugarcane. And so I was familiar with that being an important aspect of the place that we lived in. My mother was a city girl, pretty much. My dad had grown up in the sugar fields of Bayamón and Aguas Buenas, and so he was more into the land, that she very quickly had to learn how to manage, because she had to feed 7 children, and so she would plant yucas and yautillas and malangas, and we had plantains, and we had a lot of herbs. I remember particularly oregano and rosemary. I remember having eggplant, which is one of my favorite vegetable/fruit. And I remember that if we wanted to eat, you have a spade. You go out there and you dig it up. And so for us, the garden, we didn't even think of it as a garden. We just call it, you go to where the sweet potatoes, get some batatas, My mother would literally say, go get some batatas. And so I could tell, because the sweet potato leaves are very distinctive from others, And so we went and we got it, And so it wasn't, I don't think she even thought about it being a garden. It was just the place that fed us. And for us, it was there, and we were all a part of it. And we all had to, dig up the earth and prepare it and put in the stubs that grow it. And then in the meanwhile, still remember this wall of cane to the west of the place where we lived. So it's all very, very much in my blood, that the earth and what it can give you, when you know what it is, what's edible. That's where you get the sustenance for the rest of your life. And I still, when I go to Puerto Rico and I go to the rural parts, there are times when I have to admit in public that I get a tightness in my heart when I'm like with the earth. I'm a person who loves to walk barefoot. just it really does emotionally affect me in a very, very important and essential way. And so it's there all the time.
It grounds you, I gather. Yes. Literally ground.
Yes. And nourishes me.
Exactly. And I'm going to call you out a little bit. You said, I don't garden, but you do. Yeah. Clearly, you're connected with it in a very, very, very real way. Do you have a first memory of being in that garden? I'm assuming it was sort of Conuco-like, where you had everything kind of in symbiotic harmony. Do you have a memory?
I have two that come to mind immediately. One is that our next door neighbor used to grow her own coffee. She had, her house was just down the road from ours, and so there was a little hill behind it, and that's where she had her coffee. And so I was a little kid, and she would ask me to pick the coffee for her because, the way the bushes grow, if you're a child, it's easier for you than for a grown person. And so I would pick the coffee for her when they were nice and red, and of course I would eat them, which she didn't like, but I liked to do it. So I have very strong memories of doing that, and then she would do the whole preparation, dry it in the sun, and just the whole thing. You couldn't just say, can I have a cup of coffee? There was like a process to this. So that's one. And then the other things I remember, maybe I was 5 or 6, that my mother taught me something that was shocking to me as a little kid, and that was that I could take these beans, that she would make rice and beans for us, right? So she says, you can take these beans and then kind of put them in water for a couple of days, and then there's this little sprout, and then you can put it in the ground, and then you're gonna get a plant, and then you're gonna have beans, right? And I'm like, it was like magic, It was just magic to me to do this. And so I had a little patch of beans that I just did for myself because I wanted to see this process, Of course, not realizing just how much land you need to have a plate full of beans, but it was still, for a kid, it was just, again, the magic of the land, It was lovely.
Absolutely. And you just reminded me of something. There used to be a journalist, I think he has long gone on to ancestorhood, in Puerto Rico, named Paco Villon. And Paco Villon, at one point in time, when you were talking about how your neighbor's land was elevated, told me, coffee on the high ground, tobacco in the Midlands, and I don't know if she grew tobacco, cane by the sea. And I've always wanted to do a tasting of coffees, cigars, rums from the various terroirs throughout the Caribbean, with that, sort of paradigm, high ground, Midlands, and low ground.
But, also, the coffee has to grow under higher trees, so to give it shade. And sometimes they're fruit trees, mangoes and whatever. So even there also, the whole system feeds you.
Exactly.
Everything feeds you. So we didn't have tobacco, but we did have
The cane
everything
and
else.
the
We had the
coffee
cane and we had
and
the
the mangoes.
mangoes and the breadfruit and all these other plants that were sustenance for us. They were not just decoration.
Okay, are you most affected by sight, smell, or touch in a garden?
For me, I think it's the aroma. I think as my strongest memories usually come from Doña Lola's coffee, roasting in her huge cast iron pan, or my mother's oregano. She would always send me out to pick the achiote, the anaro, for making the oil that she cooked with, and to get the oregano. And she was very specific, get me a couple of sprigs of rosemary and just a little bit of the oregano, and then there's some basil over there if they're still, if the leaves are not too big. She was very specific. But for me, it was always, I would just constantly doing this. I still do this, by the way, when I go to a garden. If I see, oh, is that rosemary? And I'll just go like that. I'm like, oh, it's rosemary. So I think it's tactile, I guess, and the aroma. And one of the sad things in my old age now is that things don't smell as much as they did. I don't know if it's that I don't have the, I've lost the sense of smell, or that, if people give me flowers, they don't have a fragrance anymore. Am I making that up? Right. It's not right? That's true. I mean,
No, I
it's
think
crazy.
you're right.
It's crazy. I don't understand. Why would they breed them so that they don't smell, you would think?
They probably last longer. Who knows? But
That answers it. Thank you.
well, shelf life. I would say come back when the rose garden is in bloom here. They have a fragrance, and it is heady and overwhelming, and you will absolutely love it. Do you have a favorite garden? And it might be yours, which you're now saying you don't have, a friend's, a public garden, or even an imagined garden. If it's an imagined garden or any of the other kind, describe it. What's your favorite garden?
I think my favorite garden is the garden that I invented in my novel, Conquistadora, where the main character, Ana, creates this huge garden because she comes from kind of arid part of Spain, and you arrive in Puerto Rico and you can throw a seed and it'll grow the next, within days it feels. And so she creates these enormous gardens and orchards. And when I was writing that book, I was really walking with her everywhere she went, and her, snipping herbs as she went along, the kind of thing that I would do. And in my mind, this place exists, and it's very, very specific. I mean, I know every path in it.
What are some of the plants that are in it?
Well, a lot of herbs, because she and her maid, Conciencia La Joroba, were also curanderas for the community.
Okay,
And
explain
so-
curandera for those who don't speak Spanish.
that's their healer. She was the healer. Doctors were many, many miles away, and so it was women and some men also who just specialized in healing people. And in this situation, it was her, her assistant, child, many different connotations to their relationship. And so Conciencia was very gifted because she was taught by an African who came from Central Africa and knew about it and taught her. And so she had all the, savila. I mean, I don't even know the English words for some of these, aloe. There would be aloe, right? And you would have to have a whole area of savila because they are working in the fields, and so people are constantly getting cut, and of course there's fire because in order to work the cane fields, they have to set these fires to get rid of all the vermin that's running underneath, and also to get rid of the dry leaves. So things like that were part of the garden that they had to maintain. Basil albahaca, albahaca for stomach issues, ginger, jengibre, for again issues and for the throat. I mean, they were very, very specific cures for anything that happened in the area, including, according to them, to both make women or men fertile or making them infertile, depending on your need. So the gardens were very, very specific that way because they had to keep them in order to maintain the community of enslaved people in a healthy enough to continue to work. So they were enormous. These gardens. Anna's garden was huge in my mind, and she had everything. And she would send for things from Spain if she didn't have it, because she knew, it takes a day to get to the doctor.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky, So they had to do it that way. And I mean, even when I was growing up, my mother kept herbs for. I cannot even tell you what they were, but I mean, you get a headache, you get something plastered leaves against your head with Vicks Vapor Rub. I mean, and just any kind of. So my grandmother, my father's mother, she was a midwife, and she would go with this little bundle of unguents and herbs and dried leaves and fresh ones that were part of her arsenal as a midwife in this community. So they had to have them. And again, the fragrance, that's what I keep going back to, everything just smells so good.
Yeah. Well, I guess the question is, do you find that you still return to some of these when you're ill? Do you I know I have an aloe plant in my kitchen, because if there's a burn, there's aloe. Do you return to any of the traditional things in your life?
Well, my house has Vicks Vapor Rub, obviously.
Okay, plants.
I also have, alcoholado and agua de Florida. I mean, these were this is like a Puerto Rican house. You have to have it. And I use it in the ways that I learned. Agua Florida sometimes. This is going to sound gross, but let's say sometimes I have to go somewhere, I don't have time to shower, and so I'll just take in a little cotton thing, agua de Florida, and I mean, this is how you're taught, how to use these things. And so yeah, they're part of my life. I mean, they're there all the time. I wish that I had more knowledge. I mean, my other grandmother, my mother's mother, who was a smoker, and she was a different kind of curandera, who did a lot of, mysterious things that I never really quite understand. She used tobacco a lot, and so these things they were sacred to them. Tobacco was sacred to our people. It wasn't just something you just smoke while you're walking down the street. It was a sacred plant. And so I'm old enough that I still learned those kinds of things from the elders around me, who had a completely different relationship to the nature around them. Everything was sacred to them, and everything was useful.
If you had the ability to have maybe, just hypothetically, 3 plants from back then that you could grow and keep with you, what would they be?
Well, I do. In my very small way, my husband is much better at gardening than I am. I like to have fresh oregano all the time. I like to have rosemary fresh all the time. I like to have onions, fresh onions, ¿cómo se llaman?
Scallions?
Yeah, scallions. And ajo, garlic. I mean, all these things we grew. I don't think I ever saw them in plastic until I came to the United States. Tell you the truth, everything. You want a banana, you go. There's a banana plant. So those are so for me, it's the herbs that I remember because my mother always smelled like rosemary because she used to take the rosemary and do like this. Fresh rosemary. And she would go like this. And so I always thought she always used it for cooking as well, but without knowing that rosemary is good for your hair. It just so she always smelled like rosemary to me, and so it always brings me back to her when I smell rosemary.
Lovely. Note to those of you out there who are on the internet with rosemary oil, exactly what we're talking about. That whole idea of rosemary oil being used for hair growth, and it's a thing now on the internet.
Yeah.
So who knew? You've talked about connecting rosemary with your mother. Are there other plants that you connect with individuals in your life specifically?
Wow, that's a really good question. Well, tobacco with my abuela, Tata, because she was a smoker as well, but she really had a relationship to that plant. And I don't know how in Brooklyn she managed to get leaves to do the witchy things that she used to do. So yeah, I don't know what, I really don't know what she did. But I was a little afraid of a lot of the things that she did. So I think I would connect her with that. But I think they are the two. I felt for me that for some reason eggplant was like my fruit. I think when we planted one, I just thought this is like the most marvelous fruit, and my mother could make it in so many different ways. And when you're poor, you get creative about how to use what's around you. And so for me, that was the one. I wish that it were much more. I mean, yes, I wrote How to Eat a Guava, but if I had to choose one, that's the one.
An eggplant. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And interesting that you reference guava, because I have something I'm going to ask you to do later on. But you mention women pretty much exclusively in connection with this. Was it a matriarchal thing? Was it a women's thing? Is there any plant you connect with a man? Was there a gender bias to the plants and how they were grown and where they were grown and what kind of plants there were?
The cane belonged to the men.
Okay.
I mean, even though women did work in the fields, but the cane belonged to them, and everything else belonged to the women. I mean, because they were the ones who were preparing the meals, who maintaining, the little fincas or the little parcelas, whatever we had, or the gardens. They were the ones who kept them, and I think boys probably maintained them until they were old enough to go into the fields, into the cane. So I really don't connect the men with the edible part of the gardens, except for the delicious, when they would bring a stalk of cane for us to chew on. It's the most delicious thing. But that belonged to them, and we were of the earth and they were of the air.
Okay. Well, we've talked about food a lot. Within gardens, do you have flowers?
If I couldn't eat it, we didn't have it.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
we only grew things that we ate. I don't remember whatever. If there were flowers, they were wild. I don't remember anybody in Macun, except, well, there was one lady actually who's still 106 years old, still lives there. And so she used to have these vines with, we call them campanas. I don't know what they're in English. These flowers that look like huge bells that would dangle from her. So she had it was this vine that was all around her porch. And so you would go to her house and you would always say, I am 3 houses after La Casa con las Campanas. You know? This is like very distinctive. But I don't remember anybody having flowers just to have flowers. You know, even the pumpkin flowers we ate, you know, they were not pretty to look at. They were, but they were not there
They
to
were
be looked
edible.
at. Yeah.
With the whole idea of flowers and fragrance, was there any connection with home? Was there? I mean, it was all about rosemary and cooking things. Was there anything that was really kind of other, different? I mean, you mentioned earlier Vicks Vapor Rub, obviously a scent, rosemary, all of those. Nothing floral. I mean, even the Florida water, agua de Florida.
The agua de Florida was my dad. My dad used to put it when he shaved. So that was his, you know. But and it is an antiseptic, by the way. So but I think the only thing that came from outside that I remember, Vicks Vapor Rub, olive oil, which was only on special occasions. It was very expensive, but it was like a big deal when we got olive oil, and agua de Florida, and alcoholado, and everything else came from
the garden,
from where we were. Like even my mother used to make her own bread. We grew corn. Maize, because you know people don't remember that that was the grain in the Americas. You know, it wasn't wheat here. It was maize, and so there's a very long history of maize flour being way before rice came to us, before all the variety of beans that we have. It was maize that sustained us, and so I think we had that, and but I don't remember. You know, everything else came from. This is when we were living in Tua Baja.
Yeah.
When we moved to the city, of course, everything. I'll never forget the first day I saw square sliced rice, you know, I mean a bread. I'm like, what? First of all, how did they make it in that shape? I mean, it was a total mystery to me, and it was white because, of course,
White
you know,
flour.
it wasn't that color when the stuff that we made at home. So it was all pretty much, you know, what we needed to
You
sustain
grew it,
us.
you ate
Yeah.
it, you wanted it, you grew it.
Yeah, including animals. You know, I remember when we had children and our kids all wanted pets. You know, they wanted dogs and they wanted cats, and I'm going, the only thing that's gonna come to this house is something edible. I don't want to have to feed another, you know, a dog or a cat. It's just like the only animals that we had. You know, if we had a goat, una cabra, she gave us milk. You know, if we had a pig, it was gonna make pasteles eventually. You know, it's gonna end up in pernil, in lechon. You know, I mean, the chickens, the hens, everything was for sustenance. There was nothing. The idea of a pet was completely foreign to us.
Okay, you say that you are not a gardener. Are you a cook?
I'm a pretty good cook, but I don't enjoy it.
Oh,
So I know I have a lot of friends who are like fabulous cooks who love doing it. I do it because I have to eat. And so I'm not, I don't get the same pleasure. All my sisters are wonderful cooks. My brothers are all wonderful cooks. My husband's a really good cook. I am surrounded by people who feed me because it's not something that I enjoy, but I enjoy it when I eat it, when somebody else makes it. But yeah.
okay. Well, if you don't cook, what is your favorite plant-based dish to eat?
Eggplant.
Okay, eggplant, but how?
You know, ¿cómo se llama en español? Eggplant en español. Berenjena. Berenjena con bacalao. That is guisada. That is like one of my favorite, it's one of my favorite things that I have not had since my mother passed away. She knew I loved it so much that she would come from wherever she was living in, because we live up in northern Westchester, and she couldn't get her ingredients. And this is the first thing she would make was eggplant with salted codfish in sofrito,
Yeah.
delicious. So that's kind of the kind of thing that I go to. And again, I basically our family, we did have animals, but you didn't slaughter it every week. You have a pig, you have it at Christmas, you have meat at Christmas. So pretty much vegetarian almost the entire time we were there, except when a hen just wasn't laying anymore, she became arroz con pollo, So it was very much vegetable based.
Mm-hmm. So traditional.
Yeah, very traditional. And I remember going to see my grandma, my dad's mother, and she used to make for me guanimes. Does anyone remember what that is? So it's okay. So it's made from cornmeal, and it's like a tamales. It's like the equivalent of a tamales. And so she would make it, but of course, the poorer people wouldn't have meat to put it inside. So you would put maybe a little bit of cheese, or you put some just vegetables or something, and then you wrap it in banana leaf or plantain leaf, and you boil it or steam it. And so that was one of my favorite things as a little kid, that I knew that my grandma had actually ground this maize, it was not coming from Pueblo, and so those kinds of things are still very much, I feel this is why I'm so healthy at this age, is because that was the kind of diet that I had. It all came with all the minerals that the earth had.
And also you knew what was in it.
And we knew what was in it, and we knew how to mix it, and people knew it. I think, again, because I'm a good cook, is because I have that instinct of how to combine things in a way that that just came from my surroundings and from seeing my mother and the other women, because there was also a lot of communal cooking that happened with these women. They would sometimes, if there was a pig to be slaughtered, it was not just eaten by one family. I mean, it went for everybody in the barrio. So there was a lot of communal sharing of the process of preparing food, and also share it with your neighbors. So that was that. I think that it really gave me a perspective on nourishment that's kind of it's communal for me, even though the way that we live,
the community changed.
It's changed.
Your life certainly is recounted in When I Was Puerto Rican, Almost a Woman, is a series of migrations. How did the food change with those migrations? How did the food morph?
Pizza.
Okay, one-word answer.
I mean, it was like, I was 13. We're living in Bushwick at the time, or Williamsburg, and I remember walking by this restaurant where there was this huge pie on the window, and I could smell the oregano. And I remember saying to my mother, "Mom, what is that?" And she says, "Oh, this is pizza." So pizza, what is this? So that was, I think that was my first connection with United States culinary taste was pizza, because until then we ate the same way when we came to Brooklyn, except that it was a little bit, we didn't have to go out and get it. We go to the marqueta to get our stuff. And so I remember the first time I had pizza, it was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. How come we never had this? Well, no, we never had that, And so those kinds of things, the idea of quick food was something completely new to me, because in Puerto Rico, when I was growing up, you go out and you get the whatever the vegetables are, and then you have to peel it, and then you have to prepare it. And so, it was a big deal. But the idea that you could just go into a store that smelled like oregano and a flour, it was fantastic. I loved it. Just
So just the changes too. There's a passage in Almost a Woman where you talk about speaking with your siblings about wanting to buy a snowball store or this kind of thing. So speak a little bit about the attraction of that food, that American, large quotation marks, food.
Well, the U.S. American foods were really so new for me. We didn't have that many sweets because the only things, cane, of course, but so we didn't have a lot of. We had sugar, of course, for the coffee and whatever, but I don't remember desserts being a thing, and I think that became the obsession for me and my siblings. Was that all of a sudden you really could go across the street to the bodega and get a can of soda that was just just so sweet, and then the cakes that you could buy in cellophane and those kinds of things were completely new for us, and again you couldn't recognize them from whatever came from the earth because they were not in any way remotely like that. But so that was, to me, that was what U.S. American foods were like. Nothing looked like what it started with, Even the idea of going to a supermarket and the chickens are under cellophane and there's no feathers anywhere near them was weird to us, I mean, you get used to it, of course, eventually, but those kinds of things were something that, being a very observant child, I noticed those kinds of things, that everything in the United States came wrapped in plastic or didn't look anything like the original whatever it was that it's supposed to do. So that was very strange, and it took me, you get used to it. Of course, you get addicted to sugar very quickly, and so that was why I had a lot of cavities by the time I was 15. It was a completely different perspective, a nourishment from what I had been used to up till then.
So the sort of evolution from the cane fields where literally you lived in sugar, to then the American consumption of the sugar produced by the cane where you lived.
And the vast quantities, I mean, that was the other thing in the United States that is still an object of wonder for people who come from other parts of the world who don't have the enormous Costco's, let's say, is the variety and the amount. I mean, there's just so much of everything that after a while, I think it's hard to then enjoy things in the same way because it's just too much. And yet, when I think about it, when you grow up surrounded by gardens, it's not too much because it's a lot of effort to get to them, to be able to eat from the land. It's a lot of effort on your part. You have a connection with the ground. You have a connection with the weather. You have a connection with sun or no sun. I mean, those kinds of connections are so necessary for us, and so we don't really get that quite as much. I mean, I remember the very first time my kids, when my son was maybe about 4 years old or something, and I was chopping a chicken. I had bought a whole chicken, and I was preparing it to make it. And he said, "What is that?" I said, "It's a chicken. That's it's what they make chicken nuggets with," because he'd had chicken nuggets. So he said, It comes from that? He did not eat chicken for the next 4 years. He couldn't, it was like he couldn't connect to the chicken nuggets. It was weird for him.
The chicken nuggets,
So,
the chicken carcass.
so this is, I think, one of the things that I do notice in our culture is that the connection between what we put into our bodies and what comes from the ground is so different and so far apart from it, one from the other, that I think we really lose the perspective of what nourishment means, and so we're being nourished by the earth that we stand on. That's what nourishes us, and but we don't have that connection anymore.
Right, so that sort of disconnect with the earth. The difference, I think, in ways between the food of your childhood and the food of your adulthood, which segues me into the surprise that's no longer a surprise because I did tell you. As our time is winding down somewhat, I want to ask you, for about 20 years, taught when I was Puerto Rican in English classes in the Sikh program at Queens College. And every year, we would do an exercise. And I'm going to ask you to read a passage, and then I'm going to ask you to help me with the exercise. So, the passage is called How to Eat a Ripe Guava. If I may, hence the guavas.
That's right.
Even though at that point in time I didn't know that it was really eggplant, not guava. So we're going with guavas today.
I know. You want to make me happy, make me eggplant. Do you want me to read the whole thing? Or
If you don't mind.
Okay. How to eat a guava. Barco que no anda no llega a puerto. A ship that doesn't sail never reaches port. There are guavas at the shop and save. I pick one the size of a tennis ball and finger the prickly stem end. It feels familiarly bumpy and firm. The guava is not quite ripe. The skin is still a dark green. I smell it and imagine a pale pink center, the seeds tightly embedded in the flesh. A ripe guava is yellow, although some varieties have a pink tinge. The skin is thick, firm, and sweet. Its heart is bright pink and almost solid with seeds. The most delicious part of the guava surrounds the tiny seeds. If you don't know how to eat a guava, the seeds end up in the crevices between your teeth. When you bite into a ripe guava, your teeth must grip the bumpy surface and sink into the thick, edible skin without hitting the center. It takes experience to do this, as it's quite tricky to determine how far beyond the skin the seeds begin. Some years, when the rains have been plentiful and the nights cool, you can bite into a guava and not find many seeds. The guava bushes grow close to the ground, their branches laden with green then yellow fruit that seem to ripen overnight. These guavas are large and juicy, almost seedless, their roundness enticing you to have one more, just one more, because next year the rains may not come. As children, we didn't always wait for the fruit to ripen. We raided the bushes as soon as the guavas were large enough to bend the branch. A green guava is sour and hard. You bite into it at its widest point because it's easier to grasp with your teeth. You hear the skin, meat, and seeds crunching inside your head, while the inside of your mouth explodes in little spurts of sour. You grimace, your eyes water, and your cheeks disappear as your lips purse into a tight ooh. But you have another, and then another, enjoying the crunchy sounds, the acid taste, the gritty texture of the unripe center. At night, your mother makes you drink castor oil, which she says tastes better than a green guava. That's when you know for sure that you're a child and she has stopped being one. I had my last guava the day we left Puerto Rico. It was large and juicy, almost red in the center, and so fragrant that I didn't want to eat it because I would lose the smell. All the way to the airport, I scratched at it with my teeth, making little dents in the skin, chewing small pieces with my front teeth so that I could feel the texture against my tongue, the tiny pink pellets of sweet. Today, I stand before a stack of dark green guavas, each perfectly round and hard, each $1.59. The one in my hand is tempting. It smells faintly of late summer afternoons and hopscotch under the mango tree. But this is autumn in New York, and I'm no longer a child. The guava joins its sisters under the harsh fluorescent lights of the exotic fruit display. I push my cart away toward the apples and pears of my adulthood, their nearly seedless ripeness predictable and bittersweet.
Ladies and gentlemen, Esmeralda Santiago. Thank you so very much. Okay, now I want to play a game with you. Some of you received a little blue tag, piece of paper, when you came in. If you got that piece of paper, I would like to ask you, there's a mic that's going to be passed, to tell us what was the fruit of your childhood. So think about it. And those of you who didn't get a blue tag, we may take a couple of volunteers at the end. But if you got a blue tag, you're on. If you didn't, think anyhow, because you get a chance to.
Thank you for this talk. This was lovely. And my fruit would be hobo, hog plum in English. And, thinking about Bushwick and thinking about Bed-Stuy, my grandmother would walk us to this tropical fruit vendor who had, all of the fruits from Puerto Rico from her childhood. And the one thing that she had to impress upon us was hobo, its taste, its texture, its flavor. And hobo, for those who haven't had it, has a sort of spiky texture when you bite into it. And so the nature of the fruit, it's always stood with me since that encounter, and it's always left me with that memory of Puerto Rico, even when at that time I had never been to the island of my grandmother's youth.
Thank you. Now, please, before you give up the mic, the fruit again, spell it and translate it, if you can.
Hobo and the hog plum. Hobo is spelled J-O-B-O, and the botanical identification is Spondius mombim, which is native to the Americas, but there's also an African relative, Spondius purpurea. And so it also formed an important link in the diaspora and in that transfer of knowledge across the ocean.
Thank you.
There's a cultural connection to hobos, which is very interesting. So hobos grow in the late summer or early fall, and in Puerto Rico, school starts the beginning of August. And so at the beginning of when kids, during the first few couple of months of school, if you're absent, say, estaba cogiendo hobos. It's because you were gathering the hobos because they were, they only grow at that particular time. And so you would not go to school so that you could harvest them because they were so delicious.
Hello, ladies. My family's from South Carolina, so I'm Gullah Geechee, and my fruit it depends on where you are. Some people call them bullet grapes, some people call them scorpionine, and some people call them muscadine grapes. It's a grape with like a hard exterior that you can't eat. It's almost like a guinep. It's like a guinepa, except it's not a mango flesh in the middle. It's more like a grape, but it is so delicious. And I used to eat it with my grandmother because a man used to drive from South Carolina every summer and come up here with the grapes, watermelons, and sausage from the South. And we would sit at the front steps of her beauty parlor and just eat these grapes. And when I couldn't get them, I would eat guineps instead. So they nicknamed me Guinepa.
So I grew up in Lima, Peru, and I'm going to go with, I thought first papaya, because we ate a lot of papaya, but then I'm going to go with avocado, because avocado is a fruit. And my aunt, who lived down the street, had a wonderful avocado tree in her backyard, and we just loved having our avocados from that tree. And when I moved to the States when I was 14, 15, at the suburb of New Jersey, avocado just sort of disappeared from our diet, you know? And I don't think there were that many in the store. My mom maybe bought one or two, but it wasn't the same. And then I moved to Manhattan at one point, and I lived in a fairly Puerto Rican neighborhood, and there was aguacate, which is like a large avocado. And it kind of fit the bill okay, but it felt so watery, like the name of it, aguacate. And I was looking for palta. Palta is the Peruvian avocado, or the avocado I was familiar with. And I would say, do you have palta? And they say, no, it's just aguacate. And they kind of knew. And then somewhere in the 80s, 90s, early aughts, Hass avocados were starting to appear everywhere. And that's the closest thing to the palta. And now to think that everybody knows, you know, what an avocado, palta, aguacate is, and you get avocado toast and avocados in everything, you know. And so I'm so delighted that avocado is really having its moment. So that's it.
More blue tags. More blue tags.
Thank you. Hi, or in the corner. My fruit, I went through several, but it has to be grapefruit, because in my aunt's house, we live in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, we would sit around the table and she would tell me stories about when they used to live in Ponce, and we would eat grapefruit and it would sting, it would sour, so it would sting the corners of my lips, and that's what I remember because I don't eat it anymore. So I just remember grapefruit. So that's mine. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So mine was quenepas, and they were seasonal. So as a kid, you didn't get them all year round. So when they came in, we would run to the bodega and get them in a little brown paper bag, and they would fold the edge of the brown paper bag, and so you would get maybe 8, 9. I don't remember how many. And my mom taught me how to bite into them, break them open to get the little melon piece inside. Well, one year I must have just went overboard. I got so sick. I never ate them again. Now, years later, I'm on a cruise in Jamaica, and there's a woman selling quenepas. So I was, oh my goodness, these are great, I love these. I can't eat them anymore, but I did love them. And then she called them queneps. So we had this huge, long conversation about queneps and how they grew, and I said, well, why did I get sick on them? She said, well, you probably ate too many. They were very sour, and so yeah, that's my memories of the quenepas.
Thank you. Do we have time for maybe? Are there any more blue tags?
I don't have a tag. But
No, please. That was what I was going to say. Do we have time for maybe 2 more?
I just wanted to say that I am also from South Carolina, from the Low Country Sea Islands. And so my grandmother used to have scuppernongs and scuppernong wine. But my fruit would be peaches because they are the best down there, juicy and in peach cobbler as well as plain. So, but that's pretty cool that we're sitting right next to each other.
Thank you. There's somebody in the back and somebody in the front, and getting your exercise today.
Thank you. My favorite one is mango, but for several reasons. But I have more like a questions for Esmeralda Santiago. It's related about, from your perspective, like Latin America, Caribbean, Hispanic women, how do you connect all these heritage that we carry, all Latin Americans, from all parts of the world, from the part of Santiago, Chile, to the Bronx, or the part of the Caribbean? How do you connect all these food connections between us? It's different places of the world, different products, different plants, but how we are connected through food.
I love the diversity of our hemisphere. I love that we speak, the Spanish-speaking part of Latin America, of all of Latin America and part of North America, and the fact that we are all able to understand one another, even though we use several different words for the same, pauta, aguacate, avocado, whatever. So I think that to me is just one of the wonderful aspects, that we're all able to communicate with one another, and yet we have very specific words that come not only from the African diaspora languages, but also from the indigenous languages. And the fact that they're in this hemisphere, we think of English and Spanish are the two languages that are spoken here, but there are hundreds of indigenous languages and dialects that we don't ever get to hear, like Quechua or Maya, or different parts of these lands, and they all have a different history and we're living in the same place, right? We're in the same hemisphere, but we all have a completely different history and a different connection, not only to one another, but to the history of this hemisphere. And that to me is, I connect to that ambiguity in a big way, because I know how big this world is in our side of the world, and how different we are from one another, and yet we are part of the same community of Americanos, really. America is a hemisphere. It's not a country. And so this is what I try to think about, to connect with, and to teach people about, that when they say, I am 100% American, I go, yeah, me too. I was born in Puerto Rico, we are part of this hemisphere. So that connection, I can't forget, and don't want to forget. And yet I am very, very specific to Puerto Rico, even though I have so much in commonality with the rest of this hemisphere. I am a Puerto Rican who lives in the United States. I am a Puerto Rican who was born a U.S. American citizen, right. Even though I consider my patria Puerto Rico, not the United States. There's these connections that we cannot, or that I don't want to sever, and I don't want to forget, and I want to remind people of it so that they can connect to them, because if we don't have a connection to what has happened in this hemisphere, we have lost a lot of our own history, and of our own personalities, and who we become if we don't know what that history is like. And so I think those connections are really, really essential for our survival, and for our future as people of this hemisphere. Did I even remotely answer your question, by the way? No.
La siguen.
Yes.
Well, we're beginning to.
I think so, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think media is connecting us more too, and I think I think it's really wonderful that we're finding. I very frequently I meet people who say I was born in Chile, but I don't speak Spanish, or I was born in Puerto Rico, but I've never been there, and so we have this connection to these homelands that we have different connections to them. You know, we have these connections that we can't forget, or are reminded of by our relatives. But I think it's also, there's another step, which is to claim them for ourselves and to value them for ourselves and respect them for ourselves. And, you know, there's a lot of blood and horror that happened in this hemisphere. You know, we are a people who have really suffered through a lot of just the horrors of humanity. And yet, you know, you get into a Puerto Rican party, a Dominican party, a Peruvian party, we know how to enjoy our lives. We know how to laugh. We know how to love. We know we're passionate about what makes us human. We are passionate about art. Even if sometimes, you know, we don't want our children to be artists because they're going to starve, you know, but we appreciate art. You know, we didn't even get into this whole thing.
No, that's another conversation.
That was a discussion we were having. But I think, you know, it's so important for us to claim it, to claim our hemisphere for us, you know, and to remind people that it is a hemisphere, that America is not a country. It is this huge whole side of the world, and we are all connected because we are from it, and we live in it, and we have suffered through the indignities and joys of being in this part of the world. And that to me is, you know, the older I get, the more important this becomes. And especially as I have children and grandchildren, it's very important to make sure that they know that there's a difference between what happened in Europe and what happened here. We have to know this history, and we have to value it and respect it and own it. And it'll make us, I think, happier, ultimately.
That sounds like a perfect final word. Thank you very much, Esmeralda Santiago. Thank you for coming. There are copies of When I Was Puerto Rican available. Some of them are signed, but I suspect Ms. Santiago would be pleased to dedicate them to you if you would like such a thing. Thank you so much for coming. Be well, thrive.